Hello, assistants, and welcome to one more Strengthening Our Salvation. When we speak about David, the king, and the sin of David more specifically, usually people immediately think about what happened with Bathsheba and the consequences of that sin. But there was another sin that David committed that was perhaps as serious. Now, when you look at that sin on paper, it doesn't look anywhere near as serious as committing adultery, leading up to killing a man, and hiding what he did. So what was it that David did that was so terrible that is a lesson for us today? When God brought the people of Israel out of Egypt, He wanted them to never again make the same mistake that they made when they went to Egypt to seek for help, and they stayed there because the situation was comfortable. They relied on a comfortable country, but they became slaves. And so when God brought them out of Egypt, as they were making their way to the promised land, God said, "You shall never again trust in horses or armies or chariots. Do not go back to Egypt to take its horses to strengthen yourself as a nation." God was showing His people, I am your defender, I am your protector, I am your strength. When kings were anointed as kings, they were instructed not to put their trust in their army, but on the God who defended them. But one day, David had this idea that he was going to take a census of how many warriors, how many fighters, how many men in his army he had in the whole nation of Israel. So he got one of his closest advisors, Joab, and said, "Listen, go out into Israel, find out how many men of war we have." And Joab, as a good advisor, advised him not to do that. He said, "Listen, don't do this." But David insisted. It took them over 9 months to gather the number of over 800,000 men. When David received the news of the strength of his army, these were his answers, or this was his answer. And David's heart condemned him after he had numbered the people. So David said to the Lord, "I have sinned greatly in what I have done, but now I pray, O Lord, take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have done very foolishly." The consequences of what David did was that men died because of this sin. And maybe you say, "Bishop, hold on a second. So you're telling me that David felt guilty just because he numbered his soldiers?" Actually, every country does that. Every country does a census. How many men, how many women, how many people in certain ages. Every country does that. The problem with David is that in doing so, he was taking away his trust, his dependence on God who had always defended him. And he was putting his trust now in his army. Israel often, when they went into battle, they were often outnumbered. But that never fazed them. They never feared. When they were terribly outnumbered, they never feared, and they believed that God was going to defend them, to protect them. But David, looking at how many men he had, he was saying, "I'm taking away my dependence, my trust on the one who led me to defeat Goliath with a sling and a stone, who led me to defeat great armies with a handful of men, and I'm putting my trust in my army." Maybe you say, "Bishop, what does that have to do with anything?" Listen, over the years that we have been serving God, we have seen men and women who came to the church with nothing, absolutely nothing. No family, no job, no house, no money, nothing. And thank God, because they used their faith, they manifested their faith. They built a life with stability, with a family, with prosperity. But some got to a point where they started to trust more in their riches, in their house, in their family. They started loving these things more, depending on these things more than they depended on God. Just like King Asa. King Asa, for a while, he depended on God, he trusted in God, he removed the idols from Israel, he did what was good. But when he became sick, the Bible says, in his sickness, he did not seek God. Not that it's wrong to go to the doctors, absolutely. But we have to be careful that we do not become people who lived by faith completely. When we started in our relationship with God, we depended on our faith, we depended on God opening doors, and we start putting our dependence and trust on people. Maybe someone promised you to give you a job, and you put your eggs in that basket. That person is going to help me. And that didn't work. Or even if it did, what did that do to your faith? What about you, that you start saying to yourself, you start saying to your pastor, to your colleagues of faith, listen, I can't serve. I can't serve anymore. I can't serve on Sundays. I've got to work. I've got to make money. I've got to pay my debts. But that was never an issue for you before. Why are you taking away your trust from the God who always provided for you? The God who never allowed you to lack anything. And now you put your strength, your dependence on your efforts. So you work like mad. You work like like a person who has no plan, just work, make money. You know why God initially, he instituted the Sabbath so that we would not be slaves to our work, slaves to money. One day was supposed to go for him, to serve him, to spend time with our family. Today, because of the changes in society, that Sabbath for many is the Sunday. God did not specially said or made it like it had to be a Saturday. It's a day that you have to separate for God. For many, it's Sunday. You're a doctor, you're a nurse, maybe it's another day in the week, but that day needs to exist. Otherwise, you're putting your trust in money, in your skills, in your hard work, in your time. Be careful. Be careful, because a lot of the sin that everybody knows about David is Bathsheba and the consequences of that. And what he did later seemed to be so trivial. He just numbered his army. But in doing so, he was taking his trust away from God and putting his trust in that army. Be careful, because maybe you are doing that. Maybe you do all treatments known to man. You can afford to pay the best doctors, but you're not doing a chain of prayer for your faith. Not that you shouldn't go to the doctors. You should, by all means, but put your faith on the altar, in the God that you serve, who never let you down. Be careful, maybe because you're trying to solve a problem in your marriage, in your relationship, with every book under the sun that speaks about relationship, but you no longer use your faith. That is the problem, is that when we stop trusting in God to trust in trinkets of men, we stop living by faith. That is the problem. You want to use a doctor, by all means. You want to ask someone for a favor, or someone promised to do you a favor, by all means. But that person is not the one who will give you your victory. That person is God. David had an army. In fact, he had an army of mighty men, but his victory never came. He never attributed his victory to these men. He attributed his victories, the victories of his people, to his God. Be careful, because if you stop living by faith, you run the risk of becoming like everybody else outside, who live by what they see with their eyes. We have many who once lived by faith. They're still in the church, but they've become normal people. What do I mean by normal people? I mean, they just do what everybody else in the world does. Faith, what once propelled them forward, led them forward, faith is in the back burner. That has been the downfall of many. Don't take away your trust from God. Just like you depended on Him from the beginning, depend on Him now. Because if you don't, that may be the downfall of your faith. I hope that this message has made you think more seriously about your faith, depending on God and seeking His face. And if this message was a blessing for you, feel free to share it with another assistant, someone else, and I believe that this message will bless them as well. Until next time, may God bless you. May God strengthen your faith and make you depend on Him and trust in Him. Bye-bye.